From counting lines in scripts to demanding costume changes, Steve McQueen's jealousy of James Garner knew no bounds. But in 1966, their rivalry exploded when Garner stole the role McQueen wanted most. What followed was a twisted tale of rage, revenge, and a racing movie that destroyed their friendship forever. The most shocking part? McQueen never watched Garner's film until his dying days, and what he discovered made him realize he'd been wrong all along. Steve McQueen's life was rough from the start. Born on March 24, 1930, in Beech Grove, Indiana, he never had a real home. His father, a stunt pilot, walked out when he was just 6 months old. His mother, Julia, couldn't handle raising him. She drank too much, and when he was 3, she sent him to live with his grandparents in Missouri. For a while, life was good. His great-uncle Claude took him in and gave him the closest thing he ever had to a father figure. Claude was strong and fair. He taught Steve about hard work, respect, and standing up for himself. On his 4th birthday, Claude gave him a red tricycle. That little bike sparked something in him. Speed. Racing. A love that would never fade. But nothing stayed stable for long. When he turned 8, his mother came back and took him to Indianapolis. She had a new husband, and that man was a monster. Steve struggled in school, but that wasn't the worst of it. His stepfather beat him again and again. At just 9 years old, Steve had enough. He ran away, sleeping on the streets, stealing to survive, falling in with gangs. His mother kept dragging him back, but each time she had a new husband, and each one was just as bad. By 14, he was bouncing between homes, getting in trouble, running off with a traveling circus for a while, then ending up in Los Angeles. When his latest stepfather threw him down a flight of stairs, something snapped. Steve got up, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "If you ever touch me again, I'll kill you." His stepfather knew he wasn't bluffing. He convinced Julia to get rid of him. At 14, Steve was sent to the California Junior Boys Republic, a reform school for troubled kids. At first, he fought against it, but for the first time in his life, there were rules. Order. Discipline. He resisted, but eventually, he started to change. He earned the respect of the other boys, even became part of the council that helped run things. That place left a mark on him. Even after he became famous, he never forgot it. He visited often, donated money, and reminded the boys that no matter where they came from, they still had a chance. But he wasn't done rebelling. At 16, he went to New York to try living with his mother again. It didn't work. He drifted from job to job, worked as a lumberjack in Canada, an oil rig worker in Texas, even a towel boy in a brothel in the Dominican Republic. He was arrested for vagrancy in the South and spent 30 days on a chain gang. That was a wake-up call. He saw where his life was headed. He had to get out. At 17, he made a decision. He joined the U.S. Marine Corps. His rebellious streak didn't disappear overnight. He went AWOL, got demoted 7 times, spent time in solitary confinement. But something changed. During Arctic training, a tank went off the edge into icy water. Without thinking, Steve jumped in and pulled 5 Marines to safety. He became a hero. His officers started seeing him differently. He earned a spot on President Truman's Honor Guard. The Marines gave him discipline, something he never had before. He served for 3 years before getting honorably discharged. When he got out, he was lost again. But then he found acting. Using money from the GI Bill, he joined the neighborhood playhouse in New York in 1952. He had no experience, no education, nothing that said he could make it. But he had something better. He had fire. He had survival instincts. He had everything life had beaten into him. And when he stepped into a role, people felt it. His first real break came in 1958 with The Blob, a low-budget sci-fi horror film. He played Steve Andrews, a high schooler trying to stop a deadly alien blob from consuming his town. There was just one small problem. McQueen was 28. He didn't exactly look like a teenager, but that didn't matter. His performance was gripping, and the film took off. Shot for just $110,000 to $240,000, The Blob was never meant to be a hit, but it exploded at the box office, making $4 million. McQueen, however, didn't cash in. He was offered a profit-sharing deal, but turned it down for a flat $3,000 paycheck. He thought the film would flop. It didn't. And for years, he kicked himself over that decision. But in the long run, The Blob did something far more important. It got him noticed. Dick Powell, a Hollywood heavyweight and co-founder of 4-Star Television, saw something special in him. Powell gave him a shot in Trackdown, a Western show where McQueen played a bounty hunter named Josh Randall. The audience loved him. That one episode was enough to convince producers he could carry his own show. That's how Wanted, Dead or Alive was born. It ran from 1958 to 1961 and turned McQueen into a household name. McQueen worked hard, pushing himself to get better with every episode. 3 hard, mother-grabbing years, he later said. But I learned my trade, and it gave me discipline. That discipline would take him far. The show gave him financial security, but more importantly, it taught him how to command the screen. And just as it was ending, Hollywood came calling. In 1960, he landed a role in The Magnificent Seven. This was big. The film was a Western remake of Akira Kurosawa's Seven Samurai, and the cast was stacked: Yul Brynner, Charles Bronson, James Coburn, Eli Wallach. Brynner was the official lead, but McQueen had no intention of playing second fiddle. Getting the role wasn't easy. He was still under contract for Wanted, Dead or Alive. So he faked a car accident. He put on a neck brace, claimed he needed time off, and suddenly he was free to shoot the film. Once on set, he started pulling tricks to make sure the audience's eyes were on him. If Brynner was talking, McQueen was in the background adjusting his hat, loading his gun, or shaking shotgun shells. Anything to draw attention. Brynner saw right through it. At one point, he even hired an assistant to count how many times McQueen touched his hat during their scenes. He was pissed, but McQueen didn't care. When The Magnificent Seven hit theaters on October 12, 1960, it was a smash. It made over $2 million, which was a lot back then. The score by Elmer Bernstein became legendary, and the film itself was later added to the U.S. National Film Registry. On the other hand, James Garner was born James Scott Bumgarner on April 7, 1928, in Norman, Oklahoma. His childhood was rough from the start. When he was just 4 years old, his mother, Mildred, died from complications of a botched abortion. That left James and his 2 older brothers, Charles and Jack, in the care of their father, Weldon Bill Bumgarner. But Bill had his own struggles. He drank too much and wasn't exactly the kind of man who could raise 3 boys on his own. Things got worse when Bill remarried. His new wife, Wilma, was abusive. She beat the boys with whatever she could get her hands on and humiliated James in ways that left scars far deeper than the bruises. In his autobiography, The Garner Files, he revealed how she forced him to wear dresses just to embarrass him. He never forgot it. He never forgave it. By the time he was 14, his father finally divorced Wilma. But the damage was done. James had learned to rely on himself because no one else was coming to save him. He didn't last long in school. At 16, he dropped out and started working odd jobs to survive. Money was always tight, and he bounced from one relative's home to another, never staying in one place for too long. But those years made him tough. He had no patience for authority, no tolerance for fake people, and no interest in playing by the rules. That attitude would define him for the rest of his life. Looking for a way out, he joined the Merchant Marines. He figured it was a ticket to something better, but it didn't take long for him to realize he had made a mistake. He hated the job, and the constant seasickness made it unbearable. So he quit and headed back to Oklahoma. Not long after, he enlisted in the Oklahoma National Guard. And in 1950, when the Korean War broke out, he became the first Oklahoman drafted into the U.S. Army. War was brutal. James spent 14 months in Korea, and it nearly killed him. He was wounded twice, earning 2 Purple Hearts. After the war, he came home a different man. He had seen too much. He knew what mattered and what didn't. And he wasn't going to waste time chasing things that didn't mean anything. Acting wasn't part of the plan. It just sort of happened. A friend, who worked as a talent agent, suggested he give it a shot. James wasn't convinced, but he figured he had nothing to lose. In 1954, he landed a non-speaking role as a judge in the Broadway play, The Caine Mutiny Court-Martial. It wasn't glamorous, but it turned out to be a life-changing experience. The real lesson came from observing Henry Fonda, the lead actor in the play. Fonda had a natural, effortless style, something James admired deeply. He later described watching Fonda as his personal acting school, and it shaped his own approach, understated, real, and never over the top. After his stint on Broadway, James moved into television commercials, which led to a contract with Warner Brothers in 1956. At $175 a week, it wasn't much, but it was a start. His early roles were small, appearing in films like Toward the Unknown and The Girl He Left Behind, but they gave him valuable on-set experience. Unlike many aspiring actors, James never saw Hollywood as a dreamland. To him, it was just a job, a way to pay the bills. This no-nonsense attitude set him apart in an industry full of people desperate for fame. And ironically, that very attitude would be what made him famous. Everything changed in 1957 when Warner Brothers took a gamble on him for the lead role in Maverick. At first glance, it seemed like just another Western, a dime-a-dozen show in an era flooded with cowboy stories. But James brought something different. His character, Brett Maverick, wasn't a typical gunslinger. He was a gambler and con artist who used his wits instead of violence. He was charming, funny, and always one step ahead of everyone else. Audiences loved it. Maverick became a massive hit, even outperforming The Ed Sullivan Show at times. Unlike the traditional Western heroes who solved everything with a gun, Brett Maverick used humor and trickery to win his battles. This subversion of the genre made the show fresh and exciting, and it made James Garner a star. Then came The Great Escape in 1963, a war film that made history. Steve McQueen and James Garner played 2 of the most important roles. McQueen was Captain Virgil Hiltz, better known as the Cooler King. He was a rebellious American pilot, always looking for a way out, and never afraid to challenge authority. His fearless attitude made him the standout character, especially in the famous motorcycle chase scene. Garner played Flight Lieutenant Bob Hendley, the scrounger. Unlike Hiltz, he wasn't reckless. He was smart, resourceful, and knew how to get anything the prisoners needed: fake IDs, tools, whatever it took to escape. Hiltz took the risks. Hendley made the plans. Together, they made the perfect team. The movie was based on a real-life escape from the German POW camp Stalag Luft III, but Hollywood twisted the truth. In reality, the escape was led mostly by British prisoners. The film shifted the focus to American characters like Hiltz and Hendley. Some people weren't happy about that. It made the movie more exciting, but it wasn't exactly accurate. Off-screen, McQueen and Garner didn't get along. McQueen always wanted the spotlight. He pushed for changes to his role, demanding more heroic moments. In fact, the motorcycle chase was his idea. The real escape had nothing like it, but feeling that his character wasn't heroic enough, demanded changes. He wanted more action, more excitement, and most importantly, more focus on him. Director John Sturges gave in and added the now iconic chase and jump sequence. But despite McQueen's skills as a motorcyclist, he didn't actually perform the jump himself. Stuntman Bud Ekins did. Still, McQueen never corrected the public's assumption that he had done it, reinforcing his image as the ultimate cool action star. Garner, meanwhile, found McQueen's need for attention exhausting. McQueen had a habit of trying to steal scenes, making small but noticeable movements to draw attention away from other actors. At one point, he even complained about Garner's white sweater, saying it made him look more heroic and demanding it be changed. While Garner tried to be diplomatic, he couldn't help but be frustrated by McQueen's constant need for validation. He once said McQueen was not an actor, but a poser, criticizing him for relying more on charisma than actual talent. McQueen's insecurities weren't just about his role in the film. He was obsessed with being the biggest star, even going so far as to count lines in the script to make sure he had as much dialogue as his co-stars. He even threatened to quit the movie unless his part was made more significant. This behavior put a strain on production and annoyed his co-stars, but surprisingly, it was Garner who stepped in to convince the director to keep McQueen on board. Even so, McQueen continued pushing boundaries, and at one point, Sturges seriously considered cutting him from the film. Their rivalry didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Things got even more personal when McQueen became convinced that Garner was having an affair with his wife, Neela Adams. This suspicion, though completely unfounded, added another layer of tension between them. McQueen was known for being deeply insecure in his relationships, despite his own history of infidelity. In a disturbing incident, he once forced Neela to confess to cheating by holding a gun to her head. Garner, in contrast, was devoted to his wife, Lois Clark, and had no history of infidelity. But McQueen's jealousy wouldn't let the thought go. Despite everything, Garner never spoke about McQueen with outright malice. He saw him as insecure rather than truly bad-natured. McQueen, for all his talent and star power, was constantly battling his own doubts, always needing to prove himself, even when there was no real competition. Despite the clashes, they helped turn The Great Escape into a classic. When it hit theaters in 1963, it became an instant hit. Decades later, it's still one of the greatest war films ever made. However, the rivalry between James Garner and Steve McQueen didn't end there. In 1966, Grand Prix came, a film that aimed to capture the high-speed, adrenaline-fueled world of Formula One racing. Naturally, Steve McQueen, a well-known racing enthusiast, was interested in the lead role of Pete Aaron. But before things could move forward, a behind-the-scenes clash ruined everything. During a meeting with producer Edward Lewis, McQueen's temper got the best of him. The two butted heads almost immediately, and McQueen, frustrated and unwilling to compromise, walked away from the project. Some say he had already been thinking about making his own racing movie and didn't want to be tied to someone else's vision. Either way, he was out. Director John Frankenheimer had to move fast. That's when James Garner entered the picture. Unlike McQueen, Garner wasn't known for his love of racing, but he was a proven leading man. And just like that, he landed the role. The moment McQueen found out, the tension was set. Garner called McQueen to break the news personally. McQueen's reaction was a long, awkward silence, followed by a forced congratulations. Then, McQueen stopped talking to him for a year. Garner, on the other hand, jumped straight into training with legendary driver Bob Bondurant. To everyone's surprise, he picked it up fast. While other actors got nervous past 150 miles per hour, Garner stayed cool. He even did his own driving stunts, including a dangerous fire scene at Brands Hatch. By the time the movie wrapped, real racers admitted he could have competed professionally. McQueen didn't take it well. He had wanted to be the guy who brought Formula One to the big screen. Instead, he had to watch Garner do it first. That's when he went all in on Le Mans, his own racing film. McQueen insisted on filming during an actual 24 hours of Le Mans race, determined to capture real speed, real danger, and pure authenticity. But this commitment came at a cost. The budget spiraled out of control. There was no proper script. The director, John Sturges, quit halfway through, frustrated with McQueen's perfectionism. Then it got worse. When Le Mans finally came out, it flopped. Critics called it lifeless. People admired the racing footage, but the story wasn't there. McQueen had wanted to prove he could do better than Grand Prix. Instead, his film nearly wrecked him. Meanwhile, Grand Prix became a classic. It won 3 Oscars. It had real Formula One legends like Graham Hill and Juan Manuel Fangio. More importantly, it earned respect from the racing world. Garner, who had started as just an actor playing a racer, had become part of motorsport history. Years later, McQueen's son convinced him to finally watch Grand Prix. He didn't want to admit it, but he knew it was a damn good film. The rivalry had dragged on for years, even getting petty at times. Hollywood gossip even claimed McQueen once pissed on Garner's plants out of jealousy. Maybe it was true, maybe not. But one thing was clear: he never got over it. Over time, Le Mans earned its own kind of respect. It wasn't a good movie, but it was one of the most real racing films ever made. While Grand Prix told a story, Le Mans put you in the driver's seat. That's why, despite its failure, racing fans still love it. Steve McQueen had it all. Hollywood's highest-paid actor, the ultimate tough guy, and the face of blockbuster hits like Bullet and Papillon. But by the mid-70s, things started slipping. After the towering inferno, he disappeared from the big screen for years. No more movie sets, no more premieres. Instead, he spent his time racing motorcycles and driving across the country in a motorhome. When he finally returned, the magic was gone. His later films, An Enemy of the People, Tom Horn, The Hunter, barely made a dent. Hollywood had moved on. The world's biggest star was fading. But his career wasn't the only thing falling apart. His personal life was a mess. McQueen drank too much, used drugs, and had a nasty temper. His marriages were filled with cheating, fights, and violence. His first wife, Neely Adams, later revealed the terrifying reality of their relationship. He was abusive, controlling, and at his worst, once held a loaded gun to her head. His second wife, actress Ali MacGraw, went through the same nightmare. No matter how much success he had, McQueen couldn't escape the demons chasing him. Then came the sickness. In 1978, he developed a stubborn cough. At first, he thought it was just from smoking, so he quit. But the cough didn't stop. Antibiotics didn't help. By the end of 1979, doctors gave him the news: mesothelioma, a rare and aggressive cancer. There was no cure. He believed asbestos exposure from his time in the Marines and on Hollywood film sets had caused it. It didn't matter where it came from. He was dying. Desperate for a miracle, McQueen turned to alternative medicine. He traveled to Mexico, spending a fortune, about $40,000 a month, which today would be nearly $150,000, on bizarre treatments. Coffee enemas, raw animal organs, injections of live cells from cattle and sheep. It all sounded insane, but when you're running out of time, you'll try anything. In November 1980, he made one last trip to Juarez, Mexico, for surgery to remove massive tumors from his body. The operation was a disaster. Hours later, his heart stopped. Just like that, he was gone. He was only 50. Steve McQueen's life was never clean, never quiet, never simple. He fought Hollywood, fought his own demons, and in the end, fought for his life. But even in death, he never stopped being a legend. Meanwhile, James Garner was one of those rare actors who never faded, no matter how much Hollywood changed. Even in his later years, he kept delivering roles that made people love him all over again. One of his most memorable performances was in Murphy's Romance, 1985, where he played a kind-hearted widower opposite Sally Field. It was the kind of role he did best, charming, warm, and full of quiet strength. The film was a hit, making $30 million, and his performance was so good that he got his first and only Oscar nomination. That movie was a reminder of why people had always connected with him. Then, in 2004, he took on another role that left a lasting impact. In The Notebook, he played the older Noah Calhoun, a devoted husband taking care of his wife as she lost her memory to dementia. The movie became a phenomenon, earning $117 million, and Garner's performance was one of its most emotional moments. He didn't have a ton of screen time, but every scene he was in mattered. It even got him a Screen Actors Guild nomination. Even after decades in the business, he could still move audiences in a way few actors could. But Garner wasn't just a great actor. He was someone who stood up for what was right. He fought against big studios when they tried to cheat him, something that almost no one dared to do at the time. In the 1960s, Warner Brothers tried to push him out of Maverick, using a writer's strike as an excuse. But he knew they had other projects he could have worked on, so he took them to court and won. It was a huge deal. Then, in the 1980s, he went up against Universal Studios over the Rockford Files. He accused them of lying about how much money the show made so they wouldn't have to pay him what he was owed. He sued them for $16.5 million, and after 6 years of fighting, the case was settled. The amount was never made public, but rumors said it was in his favor. More importantly, his battle exposed how studios manipulated money to avoid paying actors, paving the way for others to fight back. But years of doing his own stunts took a toll on him. By the late 1980s, he had serious knee and back problems. In 1988, he needed quintuple bypass surgery, but still kept acting. Later, he had multiple knee replacements, and in 2008, he suffered a severe stroke. Even with all of that, he never lost his sense of humor or his kindness. Behind the scenes, he also struggled with depression, something few people knew about, but he never let it define him. He was always professional, always respected, and always someone people admired. In 2010, he finally stepped away from acting for good. Then, on July 19, 2014, he passed away at 86. Hollywood lost more than just an actor that day. They lost a man who had spent his life standing up for himself and others. He didn't just leave behind great performances. He left behind a legacy of strength, fairness, and the kind of quiet heroism that never fades.